The canyon winds mocked her. Her virgin offer met a quiet rest here. The sun was dying behind the red cliffs when Mira Louise Colton finally stopped walking. Her boots, once proper Philadelphia leather, were torn at the seams. The hem of her traveling dress, meant for carriages and church socials, was stiff with dried mud and torn by thorns. She had been walking for 2 days since the wagon attack, and Canyon Ridge stretched before her like the mouth of some ancient beast, all shadow and stone. She pressed her back against a boulder still warm from the day's heat and closed her eyes. The white silk ribbon around her wrist, her mother's final gift before sending her west to marry, caught on the rough stone. She didn't pull it free. What did it matter now? The promise it represented was as lost as the wagon train scattered somewhere behind her in the desert. The wind picked up, whistling through the canyon with a sound like laughter. Mira opened her eyes and stared at the darkening sky. 23 years old, raised in her father's parsonage, taught to embroider scripture and speak only when spoken to. And here she was alone in the wilderness with nothing but a half-empty canteen and the dress on her back. She should pray, that's what Father would say. But the words wouldn't come. They'd dried up somewhere between watching the driver take his last breath and running until her lungs burned. The bandits had taken everything worth taking and left the rest to rot under the New Mexico sun. She'd been hiding behind an overturned trunk when they'd finally ridden off, whooping like demons. The sound of hooves on stone made her freeze. Her hand went to the small knife in her boot, the one useful thing her mother had secretly taught her before she left. "Every lady should have something sharp," she'd whispered, pressing it into Mira's palm at the train station. But it was just one rider, moving slow, a man on a dust-colored horse, leading a pack mule. He wasn't riding hard like the bandits had. This was the careful pace of someone who knew these canyons, who moved through them like he belonged. Mira pressed herself smaller against the boulder. But it was too late. He'd seen her. The horse stopped 20 feet away, and the man dismounted with the easy motion of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. He was tall, weathered like old leather, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that gave nothing away. Not young, but not old either, maybe 10 years past her own age. His clothes were practical worn canvas pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest marked by use. A revolver sat easy on his hip, but his hand didn't go near it. "Ma'am." His voice was low, careful, like he was talking to a spooked horse. "You hurt?" Mira found her voice, though it came out cracked from thirst. "No." He studied her for a long moment, taking in the torn dress, the empty hands, the way she held herself like she expected to run. Then he turned to his mule and pulled something from the pack. "Here." He held out a canteen and a wrapped bundle. "Water first, slow sips." She should refuse. Everything her mother had taught her said a lady didn't take charity from strange men in the wilderness. But her mother had never been 2 days without water in Canyon Ridge. Mira took the canteen with shaking hands. The water was warm, but clean. She forced herself to drink slowly while he unwrapped the bundled cornbread, dried meat, an apple that had seen better days. He set it on a flat rock between them and stepped back. "Name's Brig Hollow," he said, settling onto a boulder of his own. "Been riding these canyons 15 years. Mira Colton." The name felt strange in her mouth. Soon it would have been Mira Grayson, wife of Nathaniel Grayson of the Eastern Graysons. But that future had scattered with the wagon train. "Your people." He didn't look at her when he asked, giving her the kindness of not watching her face crumble. "Gone. Bandits hit us 2 days back, near Skeleton Creek." He nodded like he'd expected as much. "Skeleton Creek's bad territory. Your guides should have known better." "They said it was the fastest route." "Usually is, right up until it isn't." He pulled tobacco from his vest, started rolling a cigarette with practiced fingers. "You walking anywhere particular?" She almost laughed. Where would she go back east to face the shame of returning unmarried forward to Nathaniel, who expected a proper virgin bride delivered like a package? She touched the silk ribbon at her wrist. I suppose I'm walking nowhere. He lit the cigarette, took a long draw. Nowhere's as good a place as any, but night's coming, and this canyon gets cold. There's a cave about a quarter-mile up. Dry, defendable. You can rest there. I couldn't. The proper refusal started automatically. Wasn't offering to share it. His voice stayed level. Matter of fact. I'll camp down canyon, but you'll freeze out here, and the coyotes get bold after dark. She looked at him then. Really looked. His face was all angles and weathered lines, but his eyes were steady. Not kind exactly, but not cruel either. Just practical. Why help me? He stood, crushed the cigarette under his boot. Maybe because 15 years ago, someone found me half dead in a canyon and offered me water instead of a bullet. Maybe because leaving a woman alone in Canyon Ridge sits wrong in my gut. Or maybe, he almost smiled, just a slight pull at the corner of his mouth. Maybe I just don't like waste, and you dying out here would be a waste. He moved to his horse, pulled a blanket from behind the saddle. Cave's that way. Follow the white rocks. There's dry wood inside and matches in this bundle. I'll be at the first big boulder down canyon if trouble comes. I can't pay you. He'd already turned away, but he paused. Didn't ask for payment. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Desperate and shameful. There are things I'm untouched, and if you wanted. He turned back slowly, and for the first time, she saw emotion flicker across his face. Not desire or disgust, but something that might have been disappointment. Ma'am, Miss Colton. His voice was careful again, but firmer. Don't trade what no man has a right to ask for. That's canyon thinking, crooked as these trails. You need rest and food and a safe place to sleep. That's all I'm offering, and it don't cost what you're thinking. Heat flooded her face. She'd just offered herself like a saloon woman, and he'd refused like she was a child playing at being grown. But under the shame was something else, a strange lightness. He'd said no. When had anyone ever told her no to something she'd offered? I apologize. I didn't mean. No need. He'd already turned back to his horse. World's hard enough without adding sorries to the pile. Cave's waiting. Rest here tonight. Tomorrow you can decide if you're walking somewhere or nowhere. He swung into the saddle with that same easy motion and clicked to his horse. Then he was gone, vanishing into the growing shadows down canyon, leaving her with water, food, a blanket, and the strangest feeling that she'd just been given something more valuable than any of them. Mira gathered the supplies and started toward the white rocks. The canyon wind had stopped its mocking whistle. Now it just sounded like wind cold and wild and strangely honest. The cave was where he'd said, dry and surprisingly warm once she got the fire going. She ate slowly, watching the flames dance. Somewhere down canyon, a man who'd refused her desperate offer was making his own camp. She should feel ashamed, should feel grateful, should feel something proper and definable. Instead, she felt the silk ribbon around her wrist and wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd been walking toward nowhere all her life without knowing it. The morning came cold and bright, painting the canyon walls the color of dried blood. Mira woke stiff and disoriented, the events of yesterday feeling like a fever dream until she saw the remains of the fire and the empty water canteen beside her blanket. She emerged from the cave to find Brig Hollow already there, sitting on his horse like he'd grown from the saddle itself. A second horse stood beside him, a sturdy mare with a pack saddle. Morning. He touched his hat brim. Thought you might need supplies. I told you I can't pay. Not asking you to. He dismounted and began checking the pack saddle's straps. But you can't walk to nowhere on an empty stomach and torn boots. There's a trading post 2 days north. Figure you can decide what to do when we get there. Canyon's no place for a woman alone, especially one who doesn't know the trails. He glanced at her torn boots. Can you ride? Yes. She'd learned side saddle in Philadelphia, riding her father's gentle minister's horse around the church grounds. But that seemed like another lifetime now. Good. This is Sadie. She's steady and knows the trails. He adjusted the stirrups without looking at her. Your dress'll make it hard to ride proper. There's canvas pants and a shirt in the pack. They'll be too big, but they'll do. The impropriety of wearing men's clothing should have horrified her. Instead, she found herself nodding. Thank you. He moved away while she changed behind a cluster of boulders. The canvas rough but warm against her skin. The pants had to be rolled up 3 times, and the shirt hung past her hips. But she could move freely for the first time in days. She folded her torn dress carefully and tucked it in the pack, unable to quite let it go. When she emerged, Brigg was rolling another cigarette. Studying the canyon walls, he glanced at her once, nodded like she'd passed some test, and helped her mount Sadie. Stay close, he said, swinging onto his own horse. Canyon likes to play tricks on newcomers. They rode in silence for the first hour, winding through passages so narrow their knees sometimes brushed the stone walls. Mira found herself watching him the easy way he sat his horse, how his eyes constantly scanned the ridges above them, the careful distance he kept between them. Close enough to help, far enough to avoid any suggestion of impropriety. You don't ask questions, she said finally. Figure if you want me to know something, you'll tell it. Most men would want to know why a minister's daughter was traveling alone to marry. Most men ask too many questions. He guided his horse around a fallen boulder. Besides, I can guess the shape of it. Eastern family, Western opportunity. Happens often enough. My father arranged it. Nathaniel Grayson needed a wife for his new ministry in Sacramento. Father needed the connection to the Grayson family money. The words came out bitter. I was the currency of exchange. And now? Now I suppose I'm worthless currency, damaged goods, as they say. He reined in his horse and turned to look at her fully for the first time that morning. Ma'am, I've known plenty of worthless things in my time. Women who survived what you survived ain't among them. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. The lines around his eyes, the slight scar on his jaw, the way he held himself like he was ready for trouble but hoping it wouldn't come. What made you stop for me yesterday? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, had a wife once, Mary Catherine, prettiest thing in 2 states, with a laugh that could make flowers grow in desert sand. He started his horse moving again. Lost her because I was too proud to listen when she told me she was scared. Too sure I knew better. By the time I understood, she was gone. She left you. She died. Fever took her while I was off proving what a big man I was. Driving cattle to Kansas. Could have stayed. Could have taken her somewhere with a real doctor. But the money was too good to pass up. And I was too young and stupid to know money ain't worth spit when weighed against a good woman's life. The raw honesty of it made her chest tight. I'm sorry. Was a long time ago, but when I saw you yesterday, backed against that rock like the world was fixing to end, I thought about Mary Catherine. How scared she must have been at the last, with no one there who gave a damn. He adjusted his hat. Figured maybe I could balance the scales a little, just a little. They rode on through the warming morning. The canyon began to open up, revealing glimpses of the valley beyond. Somewhere a hawk cried, the sound echoing off the stones. The man you're supposed to marry, Brigg said eventually. He expecting you. He's expecting a virgin bride of good family to arrive by wagon train this month. Someone to play piano at church socials and host tea for the ministers' wives. She touched the ribbon still tied at her wrist. I suppose he'll be disappointed. Man who values a woman only for what she ain't done yet isn't much of a man. That's not how the world sees it. Maybe not your world. He gestured at the vast landscape around them. But this ain't Philadelphia society. Out here, what matters is, can you shoot straight? Can you keep your word? Can you survive when the water runs out and the heat tries to kill you? Everything else is just fancy talk. They stopped at midday by a small spring. Brigg watered the horses while Mira sat on a flat rock, grateful to rest. He handed her dried meat and hard biscuit. then settled a respectful distance away. "You could go back," she said. "Leave me at the trading post. You don't owe me anything." "True enough," he chewed thoughtfully. "But I'm heading that way anyhow. Got business in Canyon Hollow." "What kind of business?" A slight smile touched his weathered face. "The kind that involves not asking too many questions." She found herself almost smiling back. "Fair enough." As they prepared to ride on, he stopped beside Sadie and looked up at her. "That offer you made last night, don't make it again. Not to me, not to anyone." Heat flooded her face. "I said I was sorry." "Not asking for sorry. Just want you to understand something." His gray eyes were steady on hers. "What you got your own self, your own choices that's worth more than safe passage or food or anything else a man might offer. Don't let this hard country make you think otherwise. You hearing me?" She nodded, throat tight. "Good." He swung onto his horse. "Now let's make some miles. Gets cold up here when the sun starts dropping." They rode through the afternoon, and Mira found herself watching the way the light changed on the canyon walls, how the shadows shifted and moved like living things. For the first time since the attack, she wasn't thinking about what she'd lost or where she was supposed to be. She was just riding through a beautiful, terrible landscape with a man who asked for nothing but that she survive. As the sun began its descent, painting everything gold and crimson, Brigg pointed to a cluster of buildings in the distance. "Trading post. We'll stop there tonight. Get you some proper boots. Tomorrow you can decide if you're going on to Sacramento or somewhere else." "What if I don't know where to go?" He considered this. "Then I reckon you'll stay put until you do. World's got a way of showing us where we need to be, long as we're patient enough to see it." She thought about that as they rode toward the trading post, toward hot food and a real bed and decisions she wasn't ready to make. But for now, for this moment, she was just a woman on a horse in the Great Western Territory, riding beside a man who'd shown her kindness without asking for payment. Maybe that was enough. Maybe, for the first time in her life, just being present in the moment was exactly where she needed to be. The trading post squatted against the mountainside like a wounded animal, all rough timber and desperation. The few men loitering on the porch watched their arrival with the lazy interest of those who'd seen everything the territory could offer and found it wanting. Brigg dismounted first, his hand casual but ready near his pistol. "Wait here a moment." But Mira had already seen the way those men looked at her, even in her borrowed men's clothing. Their eyes held a particular kind of calculation that made her skin crawl. She stayed on Sadie, keeping her back straight despite her exhaustion. An older woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a stained apron. Her face was carved by wind and disappointment, but her eyes were sharp. "Brigg Hollow. Been a while." "Martha." He touched his hat. "Need a room for the lady, clean and private." Martha's gaze shifted to Mira, taking in everything from the ill-fitting clothes to the white ribbon at her wrist. "Lady, is it don't get many of those through here." "She's under my protection," Briggs said quietly. But something in his tone made the lounging men suddenly find other places to look. "Room's $2. In advance." Martha's expression softened slightly. "Include supper and breakfast. Got stew tonight. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and won't kill you." Brigg paid without haggling. As Mira dismounted, her legs trembling from the long ride, he stayed close enough to discourage approach but far enough to preserve propriety. It was a dance she was beginning to recognize protection without possession. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a basin of water. Martha brought her a worn but serviceable dress. "Belonged to my daughter. She won't need it where she went." The words held a weight that discouraged questions. Alone. Mira washed the trail dust from her face and hands, then sat on the edge of the bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear the rough voices of men, the clink of bottles, occasional laughter that sounded more like barking. For the first time since the attack, she was truly alone with her thoughts. What was she doing? Following a stranger through the wilderness, wearing men's clothing, sleeping in trading posts. Her mother would be horrified. Her father would disown her. And Nathaniel, what would her intended think if he could see her now? A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "It's Brig. Brought you supper." She opened the door to find him holding a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread. He handed them over without entering, maintaining that careful distance. "Thank you." She hesitated. Would you stay? Just for a moment, I find I'm not fond of my own company tonight." He studied her face, then nodded. "Porch might be better. Less talk that way." They sat on a bench outside her room, far enough from the main gathering to avoid attention. The stew was thick with meat and potatoes, better than anything she'd eaten in days. They ate in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge over the canyon walls. "I keep thinking I should feel different," she said eventually. "Ruined, fallen, all the words they use for women who've stepped outside the proper path." "And do you?" She considered this. "I feel untethered, like a kite with its string cut. I don't know if I'm flying or falling." "Maybe you're just floating," he suggested. "Nothing wrong with floating till you figure out which way the wind's blowing." "Is that what you did after your wife?" His jaw tightened slightly, but he answered, "For a while. Drifted from place to place, job to job. Tried to outrun the guilt. Finally figured out it was riding along with me no matter how far I went. So I might as well stop running. And then I learned to live with it. Not forget you don't forget something like that, but you learn to carry it without letting it drive the wagon." He finished his stew and set the bowl aside. "Your man in Sacramento. You want to go to him?" The question she'd been avoiding. "I don't know. A week ago. I was prepared for it. Not happy about it, but prepared. Now..." She touched the ribbon at her wrist. "How can I stand before God and promise to honor a man I've never met? How can I share a bed with someone who sees me as a business arrangement?" "Can't..." His answer was simple, matter of fact. "Some women do. Make their peace with it. Find what happiness they can. Nothing wrong with that if it's what they choose. But if you're asking my opinion, I'd say a marriage without choice is just pretty chains." "So, what do? I can't go home. I have no money, no skills that matter out here. I can embroider scripture and play piano and pour tea without spilling." She heard the bitterness in her own voice. "Useless accomplishments for a useless woman." He turned to look at her then, and in the lamplight from the trading post, his eyes held something that might have been anger. "You survived an attack that killed grown men. You walked 2 days through hostile country. You got on a horse with a stranger and rode through places that would spook seasoned travelers. You're sitting here figuring out your next move instead of curling up and dying. You call that useless?" The fierce certainty in his voice made her throat tight. "I had help." "Everyone needs help sometimes. Doesn't diminish what you did with it." He stood, collecting both bowls. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll get you those boots and supplies. After that," he shrugged, "after that, you decide." "Why are you helping me?" The question she'd been afraid to ask. "Really? Not the story about your wife, that's why you stopped. But why keep helping?" He paused at her door, not turning around. "Maybe because I've been where you are. Different circumstances, but same lost feeling. Someone helped me then, expected nothing back. Changed everything." He did turn then, just enough for her to see his profile. "Or maybe I just don't like waste, and you giving up now would be a waste of a perfectly good survivor." After he left, Mira lay on the narrow bed staring at the ceiling. Through the walls came the sounds of the trading post settling for the night doors closing. Boots on wooden floors. Someone playing a harmonica badly. Normal sounds of life continuing despite her world having ended and begun again in the space of days. She thought about Nathaniel Grayson, waiting in Sacramento for his proper bride. Would he send someone to look for her when she didn't arrive? Would he mourn the loss of his business arrangement? Somehow she doubted it. He'd simply write to another Eastern family with daughters to spare. The white ribbon caught moonlight from the small window. Her mother had tied it on her wrist the morning she left, tears streaming down her face. For your wedding night, she'd whispered. So you remember you're giving a gift, not paying a debt. But what if the gift was never meant to be given to a stranger in California? What if it was hers to keep until she found someone who saw her as more than currency? Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed not of Philadelphia parlors or church socials, but of canyon walls the color of dried blood, and a man who'd offered her water without asking for anything in return. In the dream, she was riding Sadie through endless passages of stone, and she wasn't lost at all. She was just traveling, and that was enough. Morning would bring decisions. The trading post was a crossroads. She could go forward to Sacramento, back to Philadelphia, or somewhere else entirely. But for tonight, she was just a woman in a small room in the middle of nowhere, and that was the most honest thing she'd been in years. Outside, a coyote howled at the moon, and the sound didn't frighten her at all. It sounded like freedom, wild and painful and absolutely real. The morning brought decisions wrapped in new leather boots and the smell of coffee strong enough to strip paint. Mira sat across from Brig at a rough table in the trading post, watching him negotiate with Martha for supplies. He had a way of getting fair prices without seeming to haggle, just stating what things were worth in a tone that brooked no argument. "The lady needs a coat too," he said, "something that'll turn wind and rain." "I don't need," Mira started, but he cut her off with a look. "Canyon winter's coming. You'll need it whether you're going to Sacramento or staying put." Martha returned with a wool coat, worn but well made. As Mira tried it on, she caught sight of herself in the cracked mirror behind the counter. The woman looking back was a stranger sun-touched skin, eyes that had seen too much, clothes that belonged to someone who worked for a living. Nothing like the pale minister's daughter who'd left Philadelphia in lace and propriety. "Suits you," Martha said, and there was approval in her voice that hadn't been there yesterday. They were loading the supplies onto Sadie when the sound of approaching horses made Briggs' hand drift to his gun. 3 riders came into view, and Mira's stomach dropped. She recognized the type drifters who haunted the territories, taking what they wanted from those too weak to stop them. Well, the lead rider, a man with pale eyes and a scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer, dismounted lazily. "Brig Hollow, heard you were babysitting these days." "Jennings!" Briggs' voice was neutral, but his body had shifted, putting himself between Mira and the newcomers. "Thought you were down in Mexico." "Got too hot down there. Figured we'd try our luck in friendlier territory." Jennings' eyes found Mira, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "This your woman?" "The lady's under my protection." "A lady?" One of the other riders laughed. "Don't look like no lady to me. Looks like—" "Careful!" The single word from Briggs stopped the man mid-sentence. Real careful about finishing that thought. The tension stretched taut as old leather. Mira found herself calculating distances to Sadie, to the door, to the rifle she could see on Briggs' saddle. Her hand moved unconsciously to the small knife in her boot. Jennings smiled wider, ugly and knowing. "No offense meant, just seems a shame. A pretty thing like that following you around. When you get tired of playing guardian angel, you let us know. We'll take good care of her." "The lady makes her own choices," Briggs said, "and I doubt they'll include you." "We'll see." Jennings remounted, tipping his hat mockingly at Mira. "Ma'am, looking forward to making your acquaintance when Hollow here moves on. He always does. You know, ask anyone from here to the border. Brig Hollow don't stay put for nothing or nobody." They rode off laughing, and Mira released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Brig remained still, watching until they disappeared around a bend. "We should go," he said finally. "They'll circle back." "Those men." "Our trouble looking for a place to happen? Come on." They rode hard for an hour, Brig constantly checking their back trail. When he finally slowed, they were deep in a canyon she didn't recognize, all twisted rock and hidden passages. "You know them," She said it wasn't a question. Crossed paths a few times. They run stolen cattle, rob stages when they can, hurt people when they want to. His jaw was tight. Should have killed Jennings 2 years ago when I had cause. Seemed like too much trouble at the time. Would they really? She couldn't finish the question. Yes. He didn't soften it. Didn't pretend she'd misunderstood. Which is why you need to decide where you're going. Can't protect you forever, and men like that have long memories. They made camp that night in a sheltered grove. The first time they'd truly been alone together since that first night in the cave. Brigg built the fire while Mira laid out bedrolls on opposite sides of the clearing. The propriety of it seemed absurd after the day's events, but she clung to it anyway, one last thread connecting her to the world she'd known. "Tell me about your wife," she said as they ate. "What was she like?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, stubborn as a mule and twice as smart, could have had any man in 3 counties, but she chose me. Never did figure out why. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. She played piano, not like church ladies play, all proper and careful. She played like she was setting the keys on fire. Heard her playing in a saloon in Amarillo, yes, a saloon. That was Mary Catherine. Didn't care what was proper if it got in the way of living. You loved her. More than I knew a man could love anything, which made losing her that much worse. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up. What about you, ever been in love? The question surprised her. No, I thought I understood what it was supposed to be. Duty and affection and building a life together. But love like you describe. She shook her head. That wasn't for ministers' daughters. We were raised for propriety, not passion. Maybe that's changing. She looked across the fire at him. Is it? Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them that made her chest tight and her cheeks warm. He looked away first, adding wood to the fire with unnecessary focus. We should sleep. Long day tomorrow. But sleep didn't come easily. Mira lay in her bedroll, staring up at stars so bright they hurt, thinking about choices and consequences. She could still go to Sacramento, throw herself on Nathaniel's mercy, hope he'd honor the arrangement despite her circumstances. She could find work somewhere, though what work would have her, she didn't know. Or, "You awake?" Brigg's voice came soft across the darkness. "Yes. I've been thinking. There's a town about 3 days north. Canyon Hollow. Not much to look at, but they need a school teacher. The last one married a rancher and moved on." "You said you can read and write." "Yes, but can you handle children?" "I taught Sunday school, but that's not—" "It's enough. Town's not particular about credentials. Just need someone who can teach kids their letters and numbers. Pays enough to live on. Includes a room behind the schoolhouse." He paused. "If you're interested." A school teacher. It wasn't anything she'd ever imagined for herself. But then nothing about her life now matched what she'd imagined. Would they accept me? A woman alone. No references. No family. I know some people. Could vouch for you, if you want. The offer hung between them like a bridge over dark water. He was giving her a choice. A real choice. Maybe the first she'd ever had. "Why?" she asked into the darkness. "Why do all this for me?" She heard him shift, maybe sitting up. "Because everyone deserves a chance to choose their own life. And because—" He was quiet for a moment. "Because when I see you trying so hard to be what everyone else expects, it reminds me of Mary Catherine at the end, how she tried to be strong for me, tried to pretend the fever wasn't killing her, because she thought that's what I needed. If I'd just let her be scared, let her be real, maybe I'd have seen how bad it was sooner. Maybe things would have been different. I'm not her, Brigg. I know." His voice was rough. "But you're real, and you're here, and you deserve better than being shipped off to marry a stranger or running scared for the rest of your life. Canyon Hollow's not much, but it's a start. A place to figure out who Mira Colton is when she's not being anybody's daughter or anybody's intended." She sat up, hugging her knees to her chest. Across the fire, she could see his silhouette against the stars. "What about you? Would you stay?" "I don't stay anywhere." The words came automatic. But then he added, softer, "But Canyon Hollow's on my regular route. Pass through every few months with supplies. Could check on you. Make sure you're settling in all right." It wasn't a promise. Wasn't anything close to what would be proper or expected. But sitting there in the firelight, with the canyon walls rising around them like ancient guardians, Mira thought it might be enough. A town that needed a teacher, work that mattered, and a man who'd passed through sometimes, who'd taught her that kindness didn't always come with a price. "Tell me about Canyon Hollow," she said, and was rewarded with something that might have been a real smile. As he talked about the town, the cranky store owner, the saloon that served the best stew in the territory, the mix of miners and ranchers and folks just trying to get by, Mira felt something loosen in her chest. It wasn't the life she'd planned. Wasn't anything her parents would recognize or approve of. But maybe that was exactly what made it worth considering. The fire burned low as they talked, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote sang its wild song. This time, Mira found herself listening for the harmony in it. The way it seemed to say that there were still places in the world where a person could become whoever they had the courage to be. The trail to Canyon Hollow wound through country that couldn't decide if it wanted to be desert or mountain, settling for something harsh and beautiful in between. On the second day, they acquired an unexpected companion, a mule that appeared from nowhere, following them with the patient determination of its kind. "Looks like someone's taken a fancy to you," Briggs said as the creature fell into step beside Sadie. The mule was small and dusty brown, with one white ear and an expression of profound skepticism about the world in general. It wore a worn halter but no brand, suggesting it had liberated itself from somewhere. "Should we try to find its owner?" Mira asked. "In this country, a mule that wants to leave generally has good reason. Besides," he gave the animal an appraising look, "she's chosen you. Mules are particular about their people." Look at those eyes. That's a female who's done suffering fools." He almost smiled. "You two should get along fine." Mira found herself oddly touched by the creature's presence. When they stopped for water, the mule stood close, occasionally bumping her shoulder as if to remind her of its existence. "What will you call her?" Briggs asked. "I don't know. I've never named anything before." At his curious look, she explained, "Father named our animals. Biblical names. Always very serious. Well, this one doesn't look like a Ruth or a Mary." The mule chose that moment to bare its teeth at a passing lizard, looking thoroughly pleased with itself. "Moxie," Mira said suddenly. "She's got moxie." Moxie it is. They were a day out from Canyon Hollow when the riders appeared. Not Jennings and his men, these wore badges and the hard expressions of men who'd been riding too long after something they didn't expect to find. "Federal marshals," Briggs said quietly. "Let me talk." The lead marshal was a man carved from old leather and bitter experience, his badge worn smooth from years of handling. His eyes catalogued everything Briggs' gun, Mira's inappropriate clothing, the mule that clearly wasn't theirs. "Brig Hollow," the marshal said, and it wasn't a greeting. "Heard you were in these parts." "Marshal Dennison." Briggs' voice was carefully neutral. "We met in Tucson, as I recall." "We did. You were hauling a man who'd shot up a saloon. Clean work." Dennison's attention shifted to Mira. "Ma'am, might I ask your name?" "Mira Colton." The words came out steadier than she felt. Something flickered in the marshal's eyes. "Colton, would you be the young woman meant to arrive in Sacramento on the Grayson wagon train?" Her stomach clenched. Yes. Train was hit 6 days ago. Everyone dead except..." He studied her more carefully. "Well, seems we found our missing passenger." "She's not missing," Briggs said. "She's right here." Under your protection. I suppose. Dennison's tone suggested what he thought of that arrangement. Miss Colton, are you here of your own free will? The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Mira understood the implications, a young woman of good family, traveling with a man not her husband, wearing men's clothing. The conclusions drew themselves. I am, she said clearly. Mr. Hollow saved my life. He's escorting me to Canyon Hollow, where I intend to take a position as schoolteacher. Schoolteacher? Dennison's skepticism was plain. And your family, your intended, will be informed of my safety and my decision when I'm settled. The marshal exchanged looks with his men. Mr. Grayson has offered a substantial reward for your safe return. Says you're not in your right mind after the trauma. Says you might have been influenced by unscrupulous individuals. Briggs' hand had drifted to his gun, though he hadn't touched it. The movement wasn't lost on the marshals. I assure you, I'm quite in my right mind, Mira said. And if Mr. Grayson is so concerned about my welfare, he might have sent protection for the wagon train carrying his intended bride, rather than assuming the territory was as civilized as his drawing room. A ghost of appreciation crossed Dennison's weathered face. You sure about this? Miss, it's not an easy life out here, not for a woman raised gentle. I'm learning that gentle is a luxury the territory doesn't offer. I prefer to adapt rather than perish. The marshal considered this, then nodded slowly. Well then, I'll wire Sacramento that you're alive and have chosen your own path, though I suspect Mr. Grayson won't be pleased. His pleasure was never my responsibility. Marshal, it was merely expected to be. This time Dennison did smile, just slightly. No, ma'am, I suppose it wasn't. He turned to Brigg. You'll see she gets to Canyon Hollow safe. I will. Good. Because if something happens to her, I'll know where to start looking. He touched his hat to Mira. Ma'am, good luck with the teaching. After they'd gone, Brigg and Mira rode in silence for a while. Finally, she said, thank you for letting me answer. Your life, your words to speak. He glanced at her. Though you handled that better than some men I've known. Where'd that backbone come from? I think it was always there, just took being stripped of everything else to find it. She patted Moxie, who was plodding along contentedly. Will there be trouble from Nathaniel? Maybe. Men like him don't like being told no. But Canyon Hollow's got its own ways of dealing with trouble. You'll be safe there. As they crested the final ridge, the town came into view, a scattered collection of buildings clinging to the sides of a valley like they'd been dropped there by accident. It wasn't much to look at one main street that was more dust than road. Buildings of wood and adobe in various states of repair. Smoke rising from chimneys into the clear afternoon air. Canyon Hollow, Brigg announced, such as it is. It's perfect, Mira said, and meant it. It was nothing like Philadelphia with its neat rows of houses and proper gardens. But it was real, and it was a choice she'd made for herself. They rode down the main street, attracting curious looks from the people they passed. Brigg led the way to a building slightly set apart from the others, a simple structure with a small bell tower that marked it as the schoolhouse. Living quarters are around back, he said, dismounting. Let's see what shape they're in. The room was small but clean, with a bed, a stove, a table, and 2 chairs. A window looked out toward the canyon walls, painted gold in the afternoon light. It was sparse and plain and completely hers. I can get some supplies from Murphy's store. Brigg was saying, blankets, cooking things. The town council will want to meet you, but that can wait a day or 2. Brigg, she turned from the window. This is enough. It's more than enough. He stopped mid-sentence, looking at her standing there in the simple room with dust motes dancing in the light around her. Something shifted in his expression, quickly hidden. I'll introduce you to some folks. Mrs. Harmon runs the boarding house. She's tough but fair. Doc Winters is good if you need him. Stay clear of the saloon after dark unless you're with someone. He was all business now, laying out the rules of survival in Canyon Hollow. When will you leave? The question escaped before she could stop it. Tomorrow, probably. Got deliveries to make south. He paused. But I'll be back through in a month, maybe 6 weeks. Check how you're settling in. I'd like that. They stood there, the small room suddenly feeling smaller. There were things that wanted saying, but neither of them seemed to know the words. Finally, Brigg cleared his throat. There's a room for Moxie in the stable behind Murphy's. He'll charge you fair for feed. Thank you for everything. He touched his hat, that gesture she'd come to recognize as his way of acknowledging things too big for words. You earned it, Mira, every step of the way. That evening, she sat at her new table, watching the sun set over Canyon Hollow. Brigg had introduced her to the key people in town, all of whom seemed more interested in her ability to teach than her circumstances. Tomorrow he'd be gone, off to wherever the trails took him, but he'd be back. And in the meantime, she had a town to learn, children to teach, a life to build from the ground up. Moxie brayed from the stable, probably complaining about the accommodations. The sound made Mira smile. She'd arrived with nothing but torn clothes and a white ribbon that had meant everything and nothing. Now she had a job, a home, a cantankerous mule, and the promise of a man's return not because she was owed to him, but because he chose to come back, just as she chose to stay. The white ribbon lay on the table before her. Tomorrow, she thought, she'd tuck it away. Not throw it out, it was still part of her story. But she didn't need to wear it anymore. She was no longer the virgin bride being delivered to her destiny. She was Mira Colton, schoolteacher of Canyon Hollow. And that was exactly who she wanted to be. 6 weeks in Canyon Hollow had transformed Mira from a curiosity into a fixture. The children who'd initially stared at their new teacher with suspicious eyes now rushed to show her their work, competing for the small nods of approval she'd learned to distribute like precious coins. She'd discovered that frontier children responded better to steady expectations than gentle coaxing, and her classroom ran with the efficiency that surprised everyone, including herself. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the autumn sun slanting through the schoolhouse windows, when she heard the commotion outside. The children's heads turned as one toward the sound of horses and voices. Eyes on your slates, Mira said firmly, though her own heart had picked up its pace. It had been 43 days since Brigg had left. Not that she was counting. But Miss Colton, there's riders coming. Young Tommy Harmon was already half out of his seat. And they'll still be there when lessons are finished. Sarah, continue reading where Tommy left off. But the disruption was already complete when the schoolhouse door opened. Not Brigg, 3 men she didn't recognize, trail-worn and bearing the unmistakable air of trouble. The children went silent. Afternoon, miss. The speaker was young, perhaps 25, with the kind of good looks that knew their own value. Looking for the school teacher. Would that be you? I am Miss Colton, and you are interrupting my class. She kept her voice steady. Teacher Stern, my apologies. He swept off his hat with a flourish that belonged in a theater, not a frontier schoolhouse. Name's Jake Hendricks. These are my associates. We're passing through. Heard there was a new teacher in town. Thought we'd pay our respects. One of the other men snickered. Pretty little thing for a schoolmarm. That's enough. Mira stood, using every inch of her height. Gentlemen, I'll thank you to wait outside. School dismisses in 1 hour. Now, that's not very friendly. Hendricks started forward, but stopped as Mira picked up the heavy ruler from her desk. Mr. Hendricks, you have 2 choices. You can wait outside like civilized men, or you can explain to Sheriff Watson why you're disrupting the education of Canyon Hollow's children. I assure you, he takes a dim view of such behavior. The mention of the sheriff, a fiction, As Canyon Hollow made do with rotating volunteers for law enforcement gave them pause. After a moment, Hendricks smiled, all charm and hidden edges. Of course. We'll wait outside. Children should have their education. He backed toward the door, eyes never leaving her face. We'll be seeing you. Miss Colton. After they left, Mira's hands trembled slightly as she set down the ruler. The children were watching her with wide eyes. Sometimes, she said, turning back to the class, we must stand firm even when we're frightened. Now, Sarah, please continue. The hour passed slowly. When she finally dismissed the children, warning them to go straight home, she found the 3 men lounging against the schoolhouse wall. But they weren't alone misses. Harmon stood across the street, arms crossed, watching. Doc Winters had found a reason to be out front of his office. Even Murphy had emerged from his store, ostensibly to sweep his already clean porch. Canyon Hollow was watching out for its schoolteacher. Miss Colton. Hendricks straightened, that practiced smile in place. Hoping we could escort you to dinner. Been a while since we enjoyed civilized company. I'm afraid I have papers to grade. Surely a lady needs to eat. He stepped closer, and she caught the smell of trail dust and something sharper whiskey, perhaps, or danger. The lady said she's busy. The voice came from behind her, familiar as canyon wind. Briggs stood at the corner of the schoolhouse, looking exactly as he had 6 weeks ago except for the dust of hard travel. His hand rested casual on his gun belt, but his eyes were anything but casual as they took in the scene. Hollow. Hendricks' smile tightened. Didn't know you were back in town. Just rode in. Seems I have good timing. He moved closer, positioning himself slightly between Mira and the 3 men. You boys passing through. Thinking of staying a spell. Town seems hospitable. It is, to those who deserve hospitality. Briggs' tone was conversational, but Mira had learned to read the tension in his shoulders. Course, it can be unfriendly to those who overstay their welcome. Real unfriendly. The 2 groups of men measured each other in the way of predators, deciding if a fight was worth the cost. Finally, Hendricks laughed, too bright and too loud. Well then, we'll be moving on. Lots of territory to see. He tipped his hat to Mira. Ma'am, a pleasure to make your acquaintance. They mounted up and rode out, but not before one of them called back. See you around, schoolmarm, real soon. Mira waited until they were out of sight before her niece decided they'd had enough of being brave. Briggs caught her elbow, steady but not presuming. You all right? Yes. She straightened, finding her balance. Your timing was fortunate. Wasn't timing. Mrs. Harmon sent her boy to find me at Murphy's. Said there was trouble at the schoolhouse. He studied her face. They touch you. No, they were just unsettling. Hendricks is worse than unsettling. Runs with the Colson gang out of Texas. They're probably scouting for something to rob. He was still holding her elbow, and neither of them seemed inclined to change that. You handled it well. Heard you mention Sheriff Watson. Despite everything, she found herself almost smiling. It seemed effective. Considering we haven't had a Sheriff Watson in 2 years, I'd say so. Now he did smile. Just slightly. Come on, let me walk you home. The short distance to her quarters felt both eternal and too brief. Mira was acutely aware of the town watching, of Briggs' presence beside her, of 6 weeks of accumulated questions. How was your trip? She asked, needing normal words. Profitable. Trail to Tucson's getting easier. How's the teaching? Challenging. Rewarding. The Baxter twins put a snake in my desk drawer last week. Did they now? What'd you do? I picked it up and carried it outside, then made them write, I will not disturb local wildlife 100 times. She felt rather than saw his surprise. It was just a garter snake. We had them in Philadelphia too, though I wasn't supposed to know that. They'd reached her door. The sun was setting, painting Canyon Hollow in shades of gold and shadow. Briggs seemed to be wrestling with something, then pulled a small wrapped package from his jacket. "Brought you something, nothing fancy, just saw it and thought of you." Inside the brown paper was a book, Jane Eyre, by Currer Bell. The cover was worn but cared for, suggesting it had been loved before. "Where did you find this?" She ran her fingers over the binding, touched beyond words. "Tucson. Man was selling his wife's books. Said she'd passed last winter. Seemed wrong for it to sit on a shelf with no one to read it." He shifted, uncomfortable with the sentiment. "Thought you might like it. Strong woman making her own way and all." "It's perfect." She looked up at him. This man who noticed things, who remembered conversations from 6 weeks past. "Thank you." They stood there, the moment stretching like taffy, sweet and fragile. Then voices from the street broke the spell, and Briggs stepped back. "I should check on my horses. You'll be safe tonight. Hendricks won't risk coming back so soon. But keep your doors locked." "Will you—" She stopped, started again. "How long are you staying?" "Few days. Need to resupply. Rest the horses." He paused. "Thought I might check that loose board in the schoolhouse. Noticed it was creaking when I came in." She hadn't mentioned the loose board to anyone. Had, in fact, been standing on books to avoid it for 2 weeks. That would be helpful. "Tomorrow, then." He touched his hat and turned to go, then looked back. "Mira, you did good today. Real good." After he left, she sat at her small table with the book in her lap, watching darkness settle over the canyon. 6 weeks ago, she'd been terrified of men like Hendricks, would have frozen or fled. Today she'd stood her ground, protected her students, used her wits instead of surrendering to fear. She opened the book, finding an inscription on the first page in fading ink. "For my beloved Sarah, may you always choose your own path." Christmas, 1847. Below it, in fresher ink, someone Briggs had added, "For Mira, who already has." Her throat tight with unexpected tears. She lit her lamp and began to read about another woman who'd refused to be what the world expected, who'd chosen difficult freedom over comfortable captivity. Outside, Canyon Hollow settled into evening routines, doors closing, dinner fires burning, children being called home. Her home now. These her people. This her life. Tomorrow Briggs would fix the loose board. In a few days, he'd leave again. But he'd come back, just as she'd stay. And maybe that was its own kind of promise. For now, it was enough to sit in her small room with a treasured book, knowing she'd faced danger and won, knowing she was becoming the woman she'd always had the potential to be. The white ribbon sat in her drawer, carefully folded. She'd taken it out just once since arriving, holding it up to the light, remembering the girl who'd worn it like a badge of worth. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone she'd known once but could barely recall. Mira Colton, schoolteacher of Canyon Hollow, turned the page and kept reading as the canyon wind sang its wild song outside her window. The autumn gathering was Canyon Hollow's attempt at civilization, a dance held in Murphy's cleared-out storeroom, with planks laid over barrels for tables and lanterns strung from the rafters like captive stars. Mira had helped Mrs. Harmon and the other women prepare, learning the rhythms of frontier celebration, more feast than finesse, more warmth than polish. She stood now at the edge of the makeshift dance floor, wearing her best dress, a simple blue calico missus. Harmon had helped her make around her. The town whirled in country reels and square dances, boots stomping on wooden floors, fiddle music fighting the laughter and chatter. "Miss Colton's too good for dancing with the likes of us." The voice belonged to Emma Sawyer, 17 and pretty, in the sharp way of girls who'd learned early that beauty could be a weapon. She stood with a cluster of younger women, all watching Mira with calculating eyes. "I simply don't know the steps," Mira replied, keeping her tone pleasant. "Oh, that's right. They probably don't teach dancing in those fancy Eastern schools. Just teach how to look down on common folk. 2 months ago, the words would have stung. Now Mira recognized them for what they were, a young woman marking territory, establishing pecking order. She'd seen it in Philadelphia drawing rooms. The frontier just stripped away the velvet gloves. Actually, Mira said, they taught us a great many dances, but I've found that knowing steps and having the courage to dance them are different things entirely. Excuse me. She moved away, leaving Emma to parse whether she'd been insulted or not. The crowd was thick with familiar faces, her students' parents, the women she bought supplies from, the men who tipped their hats on the street. Her place here was still fragile, still being negotiated, but it was hers. You're not dancing. Brigg appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of what passed for punch in Canyon Hollow, mostly water with a hint of something sweet and definitely something stronger. Neither are you. She accepted the cup gratefully. I don't dance. He said it like a fact of nature. Sky is blue. Rocks are hard. Brigg Hollow doesn't dance. Can't or won't. Both. They stood together, watching Tommy Harmon's father swing his mother in an enthusiastic circle that threatened nearby couples. The fiddle player launched into a slower tune, and the floor reorganized itself into pairs. She doesn't belong here. The words came from behind them, just loud enough to carry. Mira recognized the voice Ruth Morrison, wife of one of the town's more prosperous ranchers. A woman who'd made it clear from Mira's first day that certain standards needed to be maintained, even in Canyon Hollow. A woman traveling alone with a man not her husband, taking up residence without family or connections. What kind of example is that for our daughters? Mira felt Brigg tense beside her, but she touched his arm lightly. This was her battle. She turned to face Mrs. Morrison directly. The older woman stood with her coterie, chin raised in righteous indignation. You're right, Mrs. Morrison. I don't belong here. Mira kept her voice calm, carrying just enough to reach the gathered crowd. I was raised for parlors and poetry readings, for serving tea and speaking only when addressed. I was meant to be delivered across the country like a parcel, to marry a man I'd never met because it was good business for everyone but me. The music had stuttered to a stop. People were listening now. But that woman, the one who belonged in that life, she died somewhere in the desert with the wagon train. What's left is just me, trying to teach your children their letters and numbers, trying to build something real out of nothing but determination. She met the eyes of the women watching. If that's not the example you want for your daughters, I understand. But I'll tell you what I tell them every day in class. We become what we have the courage to be, not what others expect us to be. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Mrs. Harmon pushed through the crowd, sturdy and implacable. Well, I for one am glad my girls have a teacher who knows her own mind. Lord knows they'll need that skill out here. She fixed Mrs. Morrison with a look that could strip paint. Unless you're planning to import them all Eastern husbands to keep them in the style you think they deserve. A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Someone started the fiddle up again, and conversation resumed, though Mira could feel the undercurrents of judgment and support swirling around her. That was well done, Brigg said quietly. Was it? I may have just made things worse. Maybe, but you said what needed saying. He set down his cup with a sudden decision. Come on. What? He held out his hand. I said I don't dance. Didn't say I couldn't. The crowd parted as he led her onto the floor. She had a moment of panic. She'd learned Philadelphia dances, not frontier reels, but then his hand was on her waist, solid and sure, and they were moving. He danced like he did everything else, with economy and purpose. No flourishes or fancy steps, just steady movement that somehow matched the music perfectly. Mira found herself relaxing, letting him lead, trusting him not to let her stumble. People are staring, she murmured. Let them. This won't help the talk. Don't care. They turned, and she caught sight of their reflection in Murphy's window. A woman in blue calico and a man in his best shirt, which looked suspiciously like his everyday shirt. Just cleaner, moving together like they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. "Why?" she asked as the music slowed. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, because you stood up in front of the whole town and told the truth. Because you're the bravest damn woman I've ever met. And you don't even know it. Because watching you stand at the edge of things when you should be in the center makes something in my chest tight." He spun her gently, brought her back. "Because I wanted to." The song ended, but they stood there a moment longer, his hand still on her waist, hers still in his. Around them, Canyon Hollow watched and whispered and drew its own conclusions. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For seeing me, not the minister's daughter or the runaway bride or the schoolteacher, just me." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability he usually kept locked away. "Mira?" Well, isn't this cozy?" The voice cracked like a whip across the moment. Jake Hendricks stood in the doorway, his two companions flanking him. They'd cleaned up some, but the danger still clung to them like smoke. "Thought we'd come enjoy the festivities." Hendricks continued, sauntering in. "Heard Canyon Hollow knows how to show visitors a good time." The crowd shifted uneasily. These weren't men you wanted at your celebration, but they weren't doing anything worth getting shot over. Yet. "Evening, Hendricks." Brigg had positioned himself slightly in front of Mira again, that subtle protection she was coming to recognize. "Thought you boys were moving on. Changed our minds, decided we liked the scenery." His eyes found Mira. "Evening, schoolmarm. Save a dance for me." "I'm afraid I'm tired," Mira said. "Perhaps another time." "Now that's unfriendly, after I asked so nice." He started forward, but stopped as several men in the crowd shifted position. Canyon Hollow might tolerate visitors, but there were limits. "The lady said she's tired," Doc Winters spoke up, mild as milk. "In my professional opinion, she should rest." "Lots of professional opinions in this town," Hendricks observed. "Makes a man wonder what you're all protecting so careful." "Common decency, Mrs." Harmon said flatly. "Though I don't expect you'd recognize it." The tension ratcheted up another notch. Mira could feel violence hovering at the edges of the room, waiting for an excuse. These men had come looking for trouble, and they'd keep pushing until they found it. "I'll dance with you," Emma Sawyer spoke up suddenly, tossing her blonde curls. "Unless you're scared of a real woman." It was perfectly calculated, a challenge wrapped in a flirtation, with just enough insult to demand response. Hendricks's attention swung to her, and Mira saw Emma's father go rigid. "Now that's more like it." Hendricks moved toward Emma, and the immediate threat shifted away from Mira. "Lead the way, darling." As they began to dance, Hendricks showy and possessive. Emma defiant Brigg drew Mira toward the door. "We should go," he said low. "This is going to get ugly." But Mira was watching Emma, seeing the calculation in the girl's eyes even as Hendricks pulled her too close. "She did that for me. She did that because she's 17 and thinks she's bulletproof. Come on." They slipped out into the cool night air. Behind them, the music continued, but it had taken on a desperate quality, like whistling past a graveyard. "They're not going to leave, are they?" Mira asked as Brigg walked her home. "They're going to keep pushing until someone breaks." "Probably. What happens then?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then Canyon Hollow deals with it. Town's got its own ways of handling trouble." They'd reached her door. The night was full of stars, and she could still hear the distant music, the sound both beautiful and ominous. "You should stay away from town for a few days," Briggs said, "until this sorts itself out." "I have school tomorrow." "Cancel it." "No." She faced him in the darkness. "I won't hide. I won't let men like that drive me back into being scared of my own shadow." "Mira." "You said I was brave. Let me be brave." He looked at her for a long moment, This woman in blue calico who'd faced down the town's judgment and danced in the center of things instead of at the edges. Then he nodded slowly. "Lock your door. Keep that knife handy. I'll be watching." After he left, Mira stood at her window, looking out at Canyon Hollow, her town, her people, her complicated new life. Tomorrow there would be consequences for tonight's choices. But tonight, she'd danced. Tonight, she'd stood in the center instead of at the edges. Tonight, she'd been seen for exactly who she was becoming. The white ribbon lay in its drawer, a relic of a different woman's life. Mira Colton, schoolteacher of Canyon Hollow, prepared for bed and whatever tomorrow might bring. The man standing in her schoolhouse doorway wore expensive clothes badly, like a crow dressed in peacock feathers. Mira recognized the type before he spoke Eastern money, Western ambitions, and the kind of certainty that came from never being told no. "Miss Colton." Nathaniel Grayson removed his hat with practiced precision. "I've come to take you home." The children sat frozen at their desks, slates forgotten. Mira set down her chalk carefully, buying time to steady her voice. "Mr. Grayson, this is unexpected." "I imagine so. When Marshal Dennison's wire arrived saying you were alive but had chosen to remain here, I knew something was wrong. Clearly, the trauma of the attack has affected your judgment." He stepped into the room. "Proprietary. I've come to set things right." He was older than she'd imagined, 40, perhaps 45, with silver threading through dark hair and lines around his mouth that suggested a man who found little to smile about. Not unhandsome, but worn in a way that had nothing to do with honest work. "Children, you're dismissed early today," Mira said calmly. "Remember your assignments for tomorrow." They filed out silently, but she saw Tommy Harmon sprint toward the main street the moment he cleared the door. Good boy. The town would know within minutes. "That was unnecessary," Nathaniel said once they were alone. "We could have spoken after your work." "This is my work, Mr. Grayson, not some temporary delusion brought on by trauma." "Please." He moved closer, and she smelled bay rum and righteousness. "You're a minister's daughter, educated, refined. You don't belong in this dusty nowhere, teaching farmers' children and living like a common—" He stopped, but the word hung unspoken between them. "Like a common what?" Her voice could have frozen flame. "A woman who works for her living, who makes her own choices, who refused to be delivered like a mail-order bride. You're overwrought. Once we're married and settled in Sacramento, you'll see things differently. I've already spoken to your father. He's prepared to forgive this. Lapse in judgment." "How generous of him." Nathaniel missed the sarcasm entirely. "I've brought a proper chaperone, Mrs. Weatherby is waiting at the hotel. We can be married here if you prefer, to avoid any further damage to your reputation. I'm willing to overlook your time traveling with that drifter, though, of course, we'll never speak of it. His name is Brig Hollow, and he saved my life. By compromising you beyond redemption." Nathaniel's face flushed. "The entire territory knows you traveled alone with him. Shared camps. Arrived here under his protection. No decent man would. Then perhaps you should stop claiming to be one." The slap of words hit harder than a physical blow. Nathaniel stepped back, his controlled facade cracking. "I'm trying to save you," he said, voice tight. "Do you understand what you've become, a schoolmarm in a nothing town, surrounded by rough men and their rougher wives? No family, no prospects, no future worth having. I have 12 students who need to learn their letters. I have a room of my own and wages I earn myself. I have people who judge me by my actions, not my father's connections." She moved to her desk, putting it between them. "I have a life I chose. Mr. Grayson, that's more than you ever offered. I offered you respectability, security, a place in society. You offered me a cage with prettier bars." The door opened, and Brig entered. Not hurrying, but moving with purpose. He took in the scene with one glance, Nathaniel's aggressive stance, Mira behind her desk, the chalk dust in the air like disturbed snow. "Afternoon," he said mildly. "Tommy said you might need some help with a difficult parent." "Mr. Hollow." Nathaniel's voice dripped disdain. "I might have known you'd appear. Come to protect your investment." "Come to check on the schoolteacher. Heard there was a disturbance." "The only disturbance is your presence. Miss Colton and I are discussing our upcoming marriage." Funny. Didn't sound like she was agreeing to much of anything. Nathaniel turned back to Mira, dismissing Brigg entirely. "I'll give you 1 day to come to your senses. Pack your things. Say your goodbyes. If you come willingly, we can still salvage something of your reputation. If not," he let the threat hang. "Well, I have connections. This school could lose its funding. These people could find life difficult without my family's goodwill." "Are you threatening the entire town because one woman won't marry you?" Brigg's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "I'm offering Miss Colton a chance to remember her duty. To her father, to her family name, to the promises made on her behalf." "Nobody made promises on my behalf," Mira said. "My father made a business arrangement. You wanted a young wife with good breeding. He wanted connections to your money. I was the currency, not the person making the deal. You have no idea how the world works. I'm learning. And what I've learned is that there's more than one world. Yours isn't the only one that matters." More people had gathered outside. She could see them through the windows. Mrs. Harmon, Doc Winters, Murphy, even Emma Sawyer. Canyon Hollow was bearing witness. "You're making a mistake," Nathaniel said. But uncertainty had crept into his voice. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Ministers' daughters didn't refuse. They didn't stand behind schoolhouse desks with chalk on their fingers and defiance in their eyes. Your father will disown you. He already has. His letter made that quite clear when Marshal Dennison informed him of my decision. The hurt of it still stung, but not as much as she'd expected. I'm already dead to him. Marrying you won't resurrect that girl. Then you'll have nothing, be nothing. She's the schoolteacher of Canyon Hollow. Briggs said, "That's something. She's got people who respect her. Work that matters, a place she earned herself. What have you got besides your daddy's money and a ring nobody wants to wear?" Nathaniel's control finally snapped. "You dare, you're nothing but a saddle tramp, a nobody who'll drift on when the mood takes you, leaving her with nothing but a ruined name and empty promises." Never promised her anything. Briggs said simply, "Never asked anything either. That's the difference between us." Nathaniel looked between them, and something in his expression shifted, calculating. "I see. You're waiting for her to come begging, aren't you? When winter sets in and the work gets too hard and she realizes what she's thrown away, you'll take what she wouldn't give me freely." The accusation was so ugly, so far from any truth Mira knew, that she found herself laughing. Not polite laughter, but the real kind that came from deep in her belly. "Oh, Mr. Grayson, you truly don't understand anything, do you?" She came around the desk, no longer needing its protection. "Brigg Hollow has had 100 chances to take what you're suggesting. When I was desperate, when I was alone, when I was grateful enough to offer, he said no, every time. Then he's a fool. No, he's the only man who's ever seen me as a person first and a woman second, who helped me without putting a price on it, who comes back not because he owns me, but because he chooses to." She stopped directly in front of Nathaniel. "I'm not going with you. Not today. Not ever. And if you try to hurt this town because of it, you'll learn that Canyon Hollow protects its own." As if to emphasize her words, the door opened again. Men and women filed in, not threatening, just present. The town council, parents of her students, people who'd decided Mira Colton belonged here regardless of how she'd arrived. Nathaniel looked around at the weathered faces, the careful stances, the quiet solidarity. Whatever he'd expected to find in Canyon Hollow, it wasn't this. "This is a mistake," he said finally. "You'll regret this choice." "Maybe, but it'll be my regret, my choice." She pulled the white ribbon from her pocket. She'd brought it this morning. Somehow, knowing. I believe this was meant to be yours, a symbol of a transaction that was never completed. He took it automatically, the silk bright against his manicured fingers. Your father said you were headstrong. I thought marriage would cure that. Then we're both fortunate it won't be tested. He left without another word, pushing through the crowd that parted just enough to let him pass. Through the window. Mira watched him stride toward the hotel, back rigid with offended dignity. Well, Mrs., Harmon said into the silence. I'd say that's that. People began to disperse, patting Mira's shoulder or nodding approval as they went. Soon, only Brigg remained, leaning against the wall like he'd grown there. You all right? I think so. She looked at her empty hands, no longer holding chalk or ribbons or other people's expectations. I thought it would be harder, saying no to everything I was raised to want. Maybe you were raised to want the wrong things. Maybe. She met his eyes. He was wrong. You know, about you drifting on, wasn't he? Brigg pushed off the wall, came closer but not too close. Always that careful distance, that respect for boundaries. Man makes his own choices, just like a woman does. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. He touched his hat. You've got students coming back tomorrow. Best get ready for them. After he left, Mira stood alone in her schoolhouse. Late afternoon sun slanting through windows that needed washing. Tomorrow there would be lessons to teach, slates to check, young minds to shape. Her life, her choice, her work. Outside, she could hear Canyon Hollow going about its business horses and wagons, conversations and commerce, the ordinary miracle of people building lives in an extraordinary place. Her place now, defended and claimed in front of witnesses. The white ribbon was gone, carried away by a man who'd never understood what it meant. But Mira Colton remained, no longer defined by what she wouldn't give but by what she chose to build. The schoolhouse bell needed polishing. She'd do that tomorrow, make it shine for her students. For now, she simply stood in the empty room and felt the weight of her freedom, heavy and precious as gold ore from the canyon walls. The first snow came early that year, drifting down like flour through a sieve while Mira taught multiplication to the older children. Through the schoolhouse windows, Canyon Hollow transformed into something from a fairy tale, all sharp edges softened and sins covered in white. Miss Colton, can we go out and catch snowflakes? Sarah Harmon asked, practically vibrating with excitement. After you finish your problems. Mathematics first, snowflakes second. A collective groan rose from 12 throats, but heads bent back to slates. Mira had learned that frontier children responded better to bargains than commands, and she'd become expert at negotiating their education. The door opened, bringing a swirl of cold air and Brigg. Shoulders dusted white. He'd been gone 3 weeks this time, the longest stretch since Nathaniel's visit 2 months ago. The children straightened, some intimidated by his presence, others, especially the boys, clearly admiring. Sorry to interrupt, he said. Mrs. Harmon sent me to tell you the storm's coming in harder than expected. Wants to know if you'll dismiss early. Mira glanced outside. What had been pretty was turning serious, the snow falling sideways now, driven by wind that rattled the windows. Children, gather your things. Stay together on your way home. Tommy and Sarah, make sure the younger ones get home safe. In the chaos of departure, Brigg helped bundle the smallest children into their coats. Mira watched him button Lucy Morrison's coat with careful fingers. The same hands that could draw a gun faster than thought, now patient with tiny buttons and a squirming 6-year-old. When the last child had gone, they were alone in the schoolhouse with the storm building outside. How bad? Mira asked. Already banking the stove? Bad enough. Temperatures dropping fast. This could be a 3-day blow. I have supplies. Not 3 days' worth. Not with the way that stove of yours eats wood. He was already moving, checking windows, making sure nothing would blow open. Better come to the boarding house. Mrs. Harmon's got rooms and enough food to feed an army. I'll be fine. He stopped, giving her that look she'd come to recognize, part exasperation, part something warmer. Woman, do you argue with everything on principle, or just when I'm trying to help? I don't need... You need firewood you don't have and food that'll last more than a day, unless you're planning to burn those books you love so much and eat chalk dust. He had a point, though she hated admitting it. Let me gather some things. They made it to the boarding house just as the storm decided to stop playing and show its teeth. Mrs. Harmon took one look at them, covered in snow and shivering, and started issuing orders like a general. Mira, you're in the blue room. Brig, you can have your usual. Supper's in an hour. Don't be late or Doc Winters will eat your portions. Man's got an appetite like a grizzly before hibernation. The blue room was small but warm, with a quilt that looked like captured summer and a window already blind with snow. Mira sat on the bed, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. She was essentially snowed in with Brig, even with the buffer of the boarding house's other residents. At supper, the dining room was full. Others had sought shelter from the storm, creating an impromptu community of the stranded. Doc Winters was indeed eating like a man possessed, while the telegraph operator regaled everyone with tales of storms past. Remember in 73 inches, he was saying. Snow so deep we had to dig tunnels between buildings. Lost Silas Murphy's mule when it fell into a drift, didn't find it till spring thaw. That mule was mean as a rattlesnake anyway, Murphy interjected. Did the town a favor, freezing like that. Mira found herself laughing along with the others, part of the easy camaraderie that came from shared circumstance. Brig sat across from her, quiet as always in company, but she caught him watching her with something like contentment. After supper, people gravitated to the parlor where someone had produced a guitar. Songs rose some Mira knew, others she learned by listening. When they called for requests, young Emma Sawyer, bolder since the night of the dance, suggested hymns. Miss Colton must know dozens, being a minister's daughter. The room went quiet, everyone remembering Nathaniel's visit, the choice she'd made. Mira felt the weight of their attention, the question under the request. I do know hymns, she said calmly. Though I warn you, my father preferred the grim ones about sin and judgment, anyone interested in sinners in the hands of an angry God. Laughter broke the tension. How about something with less brimstone? Doc Winters suggested. She sang Amazing Grace instead, her voice carrying clear and true through the lamplit room. Others joined in, even Brig's low rumble underneath the melody. When she finished, the moment held, sweet and fragile as spun sugar. Later, as the gathering broke up, Brig walked her to her door. The hallway was dim, intimate, their footsteps muffled by worn carpet. You've got a beautiful voice, he said. My one accomplishment that translates well to the frontier. Can't embroider a horse or play piano for cattle. Stop doing that. What? Making yourself smaller. Acting like what you were taught doesn't matter just because it happened somewhere else. He stepped closer, and she could smell wood smoke and leather, the outdoors clinging to him, even inside. That voice, those hymns, the way you can read a room and know just what to say, that's all yours. Doesn't matter where you learned it. They were standing very close now, the boarding house sounds fading away. Mira's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. Brig. I know. He stepped back, the moment breaking like thin ice. Storm should blow out by morning after next. I'll make sure you get back to the schoolhouse safe. Where will you go after the storm? South. Got a contract to deliver supplies to Fort Buchanan. How long? 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. Depends on the weather and the Apache. 2 months, the longest yet. She nodded like it didn't matter, like her chest hadn't gone tight at the thought. Mira, his voice was rough. There are things things I'm working through, about Mary Catherine, about staying still, about what I can offer anyone. I'm not asking for anything. The words came out sharper than intended. I learned that lesson already. I make my own life now. I know. That's what makes it harder. He touched her face, just barely, fingertips grazing her cheek. You deserve someone who can offer more than maybe. Someone who doesn't have one foot on the trail even when he's standing still. Stop telling me what I deserve. I'll decide that for myself. Something flared in his eyes, heat or hurt or both. Then he stepped back fully, touching his hat in that gesture she'd come to love and hate in equal measure. Good night, Mira. She didn't sleep well, too aware of his presence somewhere in the building, too full of words unsaid and moments unclaimed. The storm raged against the windows like her own restless heart. Morning brought a world transformed, buried in white so bright it hurt to look at. The boarding house residents worked together to dig paths, Mira helping despite protests that the school teacher shouldn't be doing such work. The school teacher has 2 working arms and a strong back, she informed Mr. Morrison, taking a shovel from his hands. The school teacher also knows that work shared is work halved. She caught Briggs smiling at that, a real smile that changed his whole face. They worked side by side, not talking much but finding a rhythm, the simple satisfaction of shared labor. That evening, the storm still raging but less violent. Mira found herself in the parlor reading to a gathered audience. She'd brought Jane Eyre from her room, and even the men listened as Jane refused Rochester's first proposal, choosing her principles over passion. Fool woman, someone muttered. Man offers her everything and she runs off. She runs off because he lied to her, Emma Sawyer said hotly. Because he tried to trick her into a false marriage. She had every right. She had pride is what she had. Mrs. Morrison interrupted. Too much pride for a woman in her position. She had self-respect, Mira said quietly, but firmly. She knew that accepting less than honesty, less than true partnership, would poison everything that came after. Better to be alone and whole than together and compromised. Silence fell. Everyone knew she wasn't just talking about Jane Eyre anymore. Still seems like a cold bed to choose, Murphy said finally. Cold beds warm up come spring. Mrs. Harmon said briskly. Can't say the same for a poisoned marriage. Now, are we reading more or jawing all night? Mira continued reading, but she was intensely aware of Briggs watching from his corner, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. The storm broke that night, wind dying to whispers and snow settling into stillness. Tomorrow, paths would be cleared, life would resume, and Briggs would prepare for his journey south. But tonight, caught between chapters of someone else's story, Mira let herself exist in the moment warm room, friendly faces, and the possibility that some stories didn't end with the heroine choosing only between compromise and solitude. Maybe, she thought as she read about Jane hearing Rochester calling across the moors, maybe some stories were still being written. Maybe the ending wasn't as certain as everyone assumed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the harsh landscape in temporary grace. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight was enough. Spring came to Canyon Hollow like a cautious visitor, testing the ground with warm days before retreating into cold nights. The snow melted in patches, revealing the earth beneath like secrets slowly told. Mira had settled into the rhythm of seasons, teaching through winter's grip and now watching her students grow restless with spring's promise. It had been 2 months since Briggs left for Fort Buchanan. 2 months of letters that came sporadically with other travelers. Brief notes that said little but somehow meant everything. Trail's been quiet. Delivered the supplies. Thinking of you. Simple words that she read until the paper wore soft. She was teaching the youngest children their letters when hoofbeats thundered down the main street too fast. Too many. Too wrong for the middle of a school day. Through the window, she saw riders streaming into town, and her heart seized. Briggs' horse was among them, riderless, reins dragging in the dirt. Children, stay here, she commanded, already moving. Sarah, you're in charge. The scene in the street was chaos. Men dismounting, shouting orders, blood on saddles and shirts. Doc Winters was already running from his office. And there, carried between two riders, was Brig, unconscious, his shirt dark with blood. Apache, someone was explaining to the gathering crowd. Ambushed us near Skeleton Ridge. Brig took an arrow, pulling Martinez to safety. Mira pushed through the crowd, reaching them as they carried Brig into Doc's office. How bad? Doc Winters, already cutting away the blood-soaked shirt, didn't look up. Bad enough. Arrow still in there, near the lung, maybe nicked it. He glanced at her then, taking in her pale face. Steady hands. You want to help or faint? Help! Good. I need hot water, clean cloths, and my instruments boiled. Martha misses. Harmon appeared as if summoned. Take over the school children. Mira's needed here. The next hours blurred together water and blood. Doc's steady hands extracting the arrow while Mira held Brig still, his skin burning with fever under her touch. He drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering words she couldn't catch. Mary Catherine's name mixed with her own. He's strong, Doc said finally, wound cleaned and wrapped. But infection's the real danger now. Next 2 days will tell. I'll stay with him. Figured you would. Doc washed his hands, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. There's a cot in the back room. You'll need rest too. But rest was impossible. Mira sat beside Brig's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, counting breaths like prayers. His face was drawn with pain even in unconsciousness, and she found herself talking to fill the silence. You impossible man, she murmured, wringing out another cool cloth for his forehead. Always protecting someone else, never watching your own back. Martinez has 6 children. Did you know that his wife brought them all to see you? Stood outside crying because you saved their father. His eyes fluttered open, focused with effort. Mira! I'm here. The children, your school. Mrs. Harmon's managing. Rest now. Can't. He struggled to sit up, fell back with a gasp that went through her like a blade. Something I need to. If I don't make it. You'll make it. Listen. His hand found hers, grip weak but desperate. The house. Bought land. Up canyon. Was going to build. He coughed, specks of blood on his lips. For you. For us. If you wanted. The revelation hit her like cold water. You bought land. 6 months ago, after that first snowstorm. Knew then I was tired of leaving, tired of. His eyes closed, strength fading. Wanted something to offer, more than maybe. She held his hand tighter, tears she hadn't let fall for months finally breaking free. You infuriating fool. I never asked for a house. I asked for you. But he was unconscious again, slipping away into fever dreams where she couldn't follow. The second night was the worst. His temperature spiked, and he thrashed with delusions, calling for Mary Catherine, apologizing over and over for not being there. Mira held him through it, her voice hoarse from talking, trying to anchor him to the present. She forgave you, she told him, not knowing if it was true but knowing he needed to hear it. She loved you. She'd want you to live, to be happy. Come back, Brig. Come back to me. Dawn of the third day brought the fever breaking, sweat soaking the sheets, but his breathing easier. Doc Winters pronounced himself cautiously optimistic. Brig slept then. Real sleep, not the restless unconsciousness of injury. When he woke that evening, Mira was reading by lamplight. Jane Eyre open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in an hour. Still reading about that fool woman who runs away. His voice was whisper rough, but amused. She nearly dropped the book. You're awake. Seems so. You've been here the whole time. Where else would I be? He studied her face, the shadows under her eyes, her hair escaping its pins, the way she clutched the book like an anchor. I meant it. About the land, the house. I know. It's good land. Spring water? View of the canyon. Close enough to town for teaching. Far enough for peace. He shifted, winced. Been drawing plans in my head on every trip. Kitchen facing east for morning sun. Porch deep enough for sitting evenings. Room for books. Room for children. Maybe, someday. The words hung between them. An offer more intimate than any touch. Is this a proposal? Brig Hollow. It's a declaration. I'm done drifting, done running from what I want because I'm scared of losing it. He reached for her hand, movements careful around his injury. I want to build that house. Want to watch you teach those children to read and write and think for themselves. Want to sit on that porch and argue about books and watch the canyon change colors. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Want to wake up knowing you're there and go to sleep the same way. For how long? Long as you'll have me? Forever, if you're willing. She thought about the white ribbon. Long gone with Nathaniel to whatever life he'd built with someone more suitable. Thought about the girl who'd worn it. Who'd believed love came with conditions and contracts. Properly witnessed and approved. I don't need a house, she said. Don't need promises of forever. People leave. People die. Things change. I learned that. His face tightened, but she squeezed his hand. But I want to build something with you anyway. Something real, something ours. Day by day, choice by choice. She smiled through tears. Though the house sounds nice too, especially the porch. He pulled her down then, kissing her with 2 months of loneliness and 3 days of almost lost chances. When they broke apart, both breathless, he was almost grinning. Is that a yes? That's a yes to building, yes to trying, yes to choosing each other again and again. She smoothed his hair back, careful of his fever-damp skin. But you have to get well first, can't build a house from Doc's sickbed. Bossy woman. Man who finally knows what he wants. Took me long enough. His eyes were drooping again. Healing taking its toll. Stay. Always was planning to. Spring bloomed fully while Brig healed. Canyon Hollow bursting with new life and possibility. By the time he was strong enough to ride, the whole town knew about the land. The house plans, the school teacher and the drifter who decided to drift no more. They married on a Sunday in May, not in a church, but in the canyon itself, with the walls as their cathedral and the town as witnesses. Mira wore a simple dress she'd made herself, flowers from Mrs. Harmon's garden in her hair. No white ribbon, no symbols of transaction, just 2 people choosing each other in front of the community that had chosen them both. That evening, sitting on the steps of the schoolhouse, their house still just marks in the dirt and dreams in their heads, Mira leaned against Brig's shoulder, watching the sun paint the canyon gold. No regrets, he asked. None. You. Just one. At her curious look, he smiled. Wish I'd stopped that first night. Wish I'd stayed instead of camping down canyon like a fool. Then we wouldn't have this story. The one where I found myself first, where you learned to stop running, where we chose each other free and clear. She kissed him, soft and sure. I like our story better. Even the hard parts, especially those, they made us who we are. Moxie brayed from her pen behind the schoolhouse, apparently offering her opinion on human sentiment. They laughed, and the sound echoed off the canyon walls like a promise not of perfection. Not of forever guaranteed, but of 2 people building something real in a harsh and beautiful place, one choice at a time. The school teacher and the drifter, writing their own story at last. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, choice, and finding home in unexpected places. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts about Mira and Brig's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage and romance in the Old West. Until next time, partners.